I intended for this video to be just pretty much another recap of the iPhone 15 event that took place on Tuesday. What's interesting is that I was going through my notes and I realized that it wasn't just the products that were sort of the main focus of the event, but rather from the products that were at the event and the things that Apple's been coming out with for things like iOS 17 and even products from previous years. It seems like Apple is focusing on a few new things going forward. In other words, it seems like they're kind of setting new standards for what they want to focus on in the future. So in this video, I want to break down 5 different things that Apple seems to be wanting to focus on for future devices, starting off with the next generation of wireless connectivity. So in recent years, Apple seems to have really been trying to upgrade the way that smartphones and other devices can connect with each other. On the iPhone 11 lineup, we had Apple introduce new ultra-wideband chips for more precise location finding, and then with the iPhone 14s, they brought satellite connectivity, so you could pretty much just contact anyone from anywhere. But with the iPhone 15, it seems like Apple's going to be taking that even further. They're expanding satellite connectivity to allow for roadside assistance, and they're upgrading ultra-wideband so that other people can help find each other through Find My. And even iOS 17 is starting to incorporate some new features like name drop and upgraded iMessaging and check-in and other features like this that help to not only keep devices connected with each other, but also the people that use them. And one of the big things that people use to stay connected with each other is, of course, the iPhone. But over the past few years, Apple has been kind of going on a weird tangent with its naming scheme. With the iPhone 11s, they first brought on the Pro name, which at the time wasn't really a signifier of anything that it was actually Pro. Even though it had the Pro name, it wasn't actually a Pro device. In other words, a device made specifically for professionals. And that stayed kind of the same thing for the next few years up until the iPhone 14 Pro. And I say up until that point because it seems like with the iPhone 15, Apple is really wanting to change things. During the keynote, Apple had 2 very different perspectives when they came out with the iPhone 15 and the 15 Pro. When they came out with the iPhone 15, they seemed to focus a lot more of the features and also the terminology for just average users. They introduced 48 megapixel cameras from the Pros, as well as things like USB-C. But the thing is, compared to the iPhone 15 Pro, the USB-C port is also less powerful. But by comparison to the 15 Pro, the 15 seems to have a lot more features that maybe Apple seems to consider that maybe people wouldn't really use as much compared to the 15 Pro. For example, the average consumer would probably be a little less likely to use things like external storage devices and things like that. I'm not saying that they wouldn't use them, but they would probably be more likely to use their USB-C ports for charging. Whereas with the 15 Pro, this is where they started to really shift their focus a bit, because rather than just use terminology that just the average person would understand, they started to incorporate a lot of things that seem to be specifically designed toward professional photographers and videographers, and even calling these people out in the keynote. And they were talking about things like color grading and focal lengths and recording directly to a Mac or to an external storage drive and having faster USB speeds. Things like this would be very appealing to a professional, but because in the past they never really had much of a difference between the regular models and the Pro models, and the Pro models themselves weren't really Pro devices, Apple seems to be wanting to change this going forward, and this seems to be going a bit further when we start looking at the chipsets themselves. So while the iPhone 15 has the A16 Bionic, the iPhone 15 Pro actually has an A17 Pro chipset. What's interesting is that even though A17 Pro signifies that it's the better version of the A17 chip, there actually is no A17 chip. Why is that important? Well, I think that may actually imply that the iPhone 16 next year will have a baseline A17 chip, which may end up incorporating less features than the regular A17 Bionic, and instead reserving those features for the Pro models specifically. And while we're talking about hardware features, let's talk a bit about feature parity. Now, feature parity is something that Apple has been trying to incorporate with its software products, because Apple is not just wanting to sell you one device, they're wanting to sell you multiple, and the ability to have similar features across multiple devices basically helps Apple build a sort of familiar experience across all of its different devices. But most of their focus so far has been on the software side of things, with things like the continuity camera being used for Mac and then bringing that to the Apple TV, as well as things like video conferencing for Apple TV, and then so many other features. The fact that Mac OS is becoming more like iPad OS is becoming more like Mac OS. But since Apple has done this with software for a while now, both the iPhone 15s as well as the Apple Watch Series 9 is starting to show that Apple is wanting to focus on a bit more on this with the hardware side of things. For example, on the iPhone 15 Pro, we now have the titanium build and the action button that we had on the Apple Watch Ultra, and the Apple Watches have the finger tap feature that we first saw introduced and demonstrated integrated on the Vision Pro. And since we mentioned software parity so far, let's also talk a little bit about gaming. So Apple's really been trying to push gaming on the MacBooks for a little while now, especially when they first introduced macOS Sonoma, which should hopefully be coming out later this month. But in the keynote, Apple started to call out a lot of features that were specifically designed, according to them, for mobile gamers. For example, the A17 Pro has a new GPU with a specially designed shader engine as well as hardware accelerated ray tracing. Basically what that means is it allows apps and games and other programs to have more realistic looking lighting. But beyond this, Apple is also working on trying to incorporate console ports of AAA games directly to the iPhone itself. So basically the iPhone itself would become a much more powerful gaming machine. And beyond all of this, Apple also really seems to be taking the iPhone in a direction that would integrate it directly a bit more with augmented reality. For example, one of the big features that Apple announced on the Vision Pro was the ability to have what they call spatial video, or in other words, just 3D video. But with the iPhone 15 Pro, Apple announced that using the ultra-wide and main lenses, people would be able to take 3D video straight from their iPhone and view it on a Vision Pro. And even with this, Apple announced that with the new ray tracing features in the iPhone 15 Pro, these would also extend to augmented reality applications and not just gaming. There's one more standard that Apple has held themselves up to for years at this point, and that is app subscriptions. Basically, Apple has been trying to help push app subscriptions to replace the current one-time purchase model, and people haven't exactly been very happy about this. But despite that, I do think that there is a middle point that developers can reach so that both developers and the people who purchase apps can benefit from this. And so go watch this video next to go learn more about that, and I'll see you over there. Adios.